Hello, Midnight TCG members. This is Midnight Fox. We're coming to you with this week's Competitive Edge podcast, and we are finishing up our trio of decks coming from the OCG to the TCG that are looking to hit big over in our gaming area, since we know that they've played well over in Japan. Tonight we're going to be talking about Evil Swarms. They were really the big talk of it before Elemental Dragons hit. But for a really good overview of it, first I'm going to say we've got Genzo on tonight.
Howdy.
We've got Genzaki recording, and he won't speak. And we got Kyo tonight. And I'm going to let Genzo do an overview, as he's researched a little bit more about the deck than I've gotten into. And I'm going to let him just kind of give us an overview of how the deck runs and such. So, take it away, Genzo.
Okay. Excuse me. So, let's just talk about the main monsters for the deck. As, you know, the rest of the deck is kind of Dino Rabbit-esque, if you will. And we'll touch on some of the more theme-specific spells and traps as we go on. But let's just get the monsters out of the way, because that's really like what the deck does anyway. So we have the 1,950 attack Evil Swarm Heliotrope, which is quite nice because that 1950 body is an immediate answer to a problem card like Thunder King Ryo. And that's like the rabbit target, because you'll run Rescue Rabbit in the deck. Then we have Evil Swarm Caster. He's a level 4, 1750 warrior, and his effect is, during the turn this card was normal summoned, you can normal summon one E-Swarm monster in addition to your normal summoner set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. So that's pretty much, you know, your rank 4 play right there. You have Caster and then one of the other level 4 Evil Swarms, and then you can make your rank 4 Evil Swarm Ixies monster play. Then we have Evil Swarm Karikion. You can banish one E-Swarm monster from your graveyard to target one E-Swarm monster in your graveyard. Add that target to your hand. This effect of Evil Swarm Karikion can only be used once per turn. And then once per turn, if that effect was activated this turn, you can normal summon one E-Swarm monster as an additional normal summon. So he's pretty much like the Constellar Sombres for the deck, and it's quite nice at times. Then we go to Evil Swarm Mandragora, and this is the plant, level 4, 1550 monster, and it's basically, if your opponent controls more monsters than you, you can special summon this card from your hand. So even if you have monsters on the field, like if you have one monster and your opponent has 2, you can still special summon this guy. So it allows for those little slightly dynamic turns where you need to have 2 level 4s. He kind of facilitates that. And my favorite monster from the Evil Swarms would be Thunderbird. He's a level 4, 1650 guy. His effect is, during either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated, except during the damage step, you can banish this card you control. During your next standby phase, return this card banished by this effect to the field, and if you do, it gains 300 attack. You can only use the effect of Evil Swarm Thunderbird once per turn. So this guy is really good. It gives you a nice opening gameplay, saying you don't have Rescue Rabbit, or you don't have Caster, and the game's not developed enough for Karikion to be a factor. Thunderbird allows you a nice opening game. And just his chain ability to cards to kind of protect itself like Wind Up Rabbit, although not as good or as efficient, depending on how you want to view that, because Wind Up Rabbit, you can just activate the effect, whereas Thunderbird needs an effect to kind of respond to. It's still nice because it can defend itself by its own effect and come back stronger to the field when he returns. So that's pretty much the monster lineup right there, guys.
Well, I mean, personally, my favorite from them, and the bad thing about my favorite from the actual type itself, is that you would have to run a highly Evil Swarm dependent deck is Bahamut. I mean, we all love cards from the past like Brain Control, Change of Heart. Now it's number 11, Big Eye. But with Bahamut, you've got a rank 4 Xyz monster that costs 2 Evil Swarm overlays, and you get to steal monsters from your opponent. I mean, and he's got a decent attack at 2,350. I think the main reason I haven't went into using him is because I just haven't had the feeling of wanting to run a pure Evil Swarm deck. I've got a variant that I've been working with, but I'll go more into that as we get later into the podcast. But Thunderbird is definitely, he is an interesting card, and he's got that ability to come back at the 1950, which, that goes over your cards like Thunder King Ryo that are limiting your draw engines and stuff. So, I mean, just my quick overview over a couple of cards. My favorite, personally, from the type is Heliotrope, and that mainly goes into the variant I've been testing with Evil Swarms. So I won't go too much into that. Just the fact that the 1950 is absolutely wonderful, and it gets over a lot of cards early game. Not going to say it's a huge difference maker late game, but early game, he's a difference maker.
I don't know. He's pretty good, and regardless of what point in the game is. I mean, unless your opponent has like a really solidified field, that 1950 is going to do some work. It's pretty nasty, and it just drives you crazy that it's only 50 points. If he was a 1900 attacker like Sabersaurus or something, sure, he'd be decent, but there wouldn't be that lore. That 50 really goes an extra mile.
That, and he's a dark, so he's Dark Arm Dragon food, he's removal. Your Evil Swarms are removal for Allure of Darkness, they're Chaos food. If you want it, you could even toss them, probably unsuccessfully, into a Dark Smorg deck. You can dump them with Armageddon Knight, Dark Greffers. I mean, there's so many support cards for Darks that I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons it hit so hard over in Japan. But kind of, once we got news of Elemental Dragons, these guys kind of got overshadowed.
Well, there's still going to be a great deck versus Elemental Dragon because Ophion. Mm-hmm. And I guess we'll go ahead and go over his effect so players can understand that if they don't already know. While this card has an Xyz material, level 5 or higher monsters cannot be special summoned. Once per turn, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card, add 1 infestation, spell, or trap card from your deck to your hand. So both of his effects are pretty dynamic because the first effect, if he's on the field, Elemental Dragons have to have the little bit of removal they main deck. So he's immediately a problem because if they can't special summon level 7 dragons, they're not doing anything really. So he's really good against the matchup. And then his second effect, just being able to add that infestation pandemic quick play spell that protects all E-Swarm monsters from spell or traps for that turn. That's kind of goofy because Forbidden Lance is a good card, but it's only going to protect one of your monsters. If you have a really developed field like a Ophion and then maybe a Heliotrope, that's a pretty solid field to be playing against. And then if they can protect both of those monsters at the cost of one card, that's really good.
I kind of agree on Ophion, but if you're playing a pure Evil Swarm deck, I kind of have to look at Ouroboros too, and it's not so much for his second or third effects. Number one, yeah, he costs you 3 overlay units, but you're, unlike cards like One-Eyed Skill Gainer, who's 2,500, and your number 16, that's 2,300. He gives you a 2,750 body out on the field. But what I like about him is not just that 2,750 body. It's his first effect to be able to detach an Xyz material and then return something on your opponent's field to their hand. I wouldn't say that I would really use sending a random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. Can it be great? Yes, but can it backfire on you if you send the wrong card from their hand to the graveyard? Of course. Target one card in your opponent's graveyard, banish that target. Some decks that works great against, but a lot of times, especially with elemental dragons hitting, you're more than likely going to end up helping your opponent with that. What I like about Ouroboros is, like I said, he's got a body that, for 3 level 4 monsters, he's got a body, and it's not evil swarm dependent. So he can be thrown in to anything that requires 3 level 4s, and the ability to return things. So, like, even though it's kind of going out of style now, Zenmane was, before he got reprinted, was your go-to rank 3 monster. But that and Stardust Dragon are still pains to run into because they limit what you can do. So I like the ability to bounce things. So it's kind of an extra compulsory evacuation device.
Ouroboros is for sure good.
Do what?
Oh, carry on, Zingo.
What were we saying, Key?
I just like he's pretty much a Trishula, but power down in a bit.
I mean, like, I think his least effective effect is his last, the banishing a card.
Yes.
But I mean, I mean, it's not necessarily weak against Elemental Dragon because I mean, unless you're just like playing, roulette by turning your opponent's graveyard upside down and then choosing a random card, like you're not going to banish the card that your opponent's going to benefit from. The sending one random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard is a really good effect, and there are already OTKs based around that, like milling your opponent's hand in one turn. So that's really good too, and I think it's the best effect he has. But I think the effect that delivers the most utility is probably the first. And that's really good, like you said, attached to that 2750 body. But let's not be mistaken, we're talking about Evil Swarm here, and while we can talk about all kind of like situational cards like an Armageddonite or a Dark Grepher that could potentially work in the deck, they won't make it into this deck because this is the Evil Swarm deck, and what they want to do is get Ophion on the field. Ophion is their guy. That's who they're going to go to 90% of the time.
Also, with the fact that he can set spell or trap, and that's the some really good trap in the set for them.
Well, I just wanted to mention Ouroboros just because he's that guy who goes in there who's not Evil Swarm dependent. So you don't exactly have to run an Evil Swarm deck to run him.
Sure.
But he's an option that's come within the archetype that we're discussing tonight.
Yeah, I got what you mean.
And just to touch base on a card that you mentioned earlier that I didn't get to talk about a little bit was Bahamut. That guy is like really good. Oh. Like he's not Ophion good, but he's really good. Like if your opponent makes a mistake of misreading a game state and then committing to the field, Bahamut is very attainable because they could just go summon Caster and then normal summon another Evil Swarm or have Mandragora. There's a lot of ways they can put 2 Evil Swarm monsters on the field and make Bahamut and then take that position play from the opponent. So I just wanted to go back and talk, that he's really good.
I'm just going to say the funniest thing I've done so far, and this is because I've been playing a variant, and that's using Bahamut, was my opponent committed to popping out a Big Eye. So I brought out Bahamut, took their Big Eye, then used their Big Eye to take their other monster, cleared their field for game.
Yep.
That's silly.
That's what I love about Bahamut. But he requires 2 Evil Swarms, so, I mean, you're going to have to run a high number of Evil Swarm monsters within the deck to be able to use him effectively. But yes, a 2,350 body is pretty effective, and the ability to steal monsters, And if your opponent commits to bringing out a Big Eye, the ability to steal 2 monsters in a turn, my opponent quit the duel because he knew it was game. He had an empty field once I took his Big Eye and his other monster.
Yeah.
So, yeah. The
But also,
Big Eye play.
like you keep mentioning, like you'll have to run a really evil swarm specific deck. I mean, that's the deck though. You know, like if you if you just look at the basic list that I'd say 98% of the people running evil swarm are running. They're running 3 Heliotrope, 3 Caster, 3 Karikion, 3 Mandragora, and 3 Thunderbird. That's the meat of the deck. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 cards. You know, so they have their, and they're all level 4. So they're going to make those Xyz monsters, you know, as easy as the hand allows them.
So we've kind of talked about the meat and potatoes of the deck and the staples. So, siding against, we all had some options we want to talk about. For me, my thoughts are Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. Evil Swarm is a dark dependent deck. So, Shadow Imprisoning shuts down their special summoning and effect abilities. Or am I? Yeah.
Yeah.
Shuts down their effect abilities, which Evil Swarms, in order to be highly competitive other than Heliotrope, really depend on their effects to win games. So, if you're looking at siding against an Evil Swarm deck, my personal opinion is Shadow Imprisoning Mirror. It's a continuous trap with no maintenance cost. Just an activation, and you probably want to have some protection, but yeah, that's more your side deck item, because we're starting to see with like the Prophecy and Elemental Dragons, things that are starting to hit, they're not so dependent on lights and darks. So side deck option, it's going to be great if you run into an Evil Swarm deck. And Gibbs
also
had one.
Yes, Consecrated Light. It's the level 1 fairy. Let's see, let me get the exact wording for the card's effect. Here we go. Neither player can normal summon or special summon dark monsters or declare an attack with a dark monster. This card cannot be destroyed by battle with a dark monster, and you take no battle damage from that battle. So and I've just noticed that a lot of people are picking this card up, you know, anticipating the release of Evil Swarms, and I think it's a great card. You know, what was like a format?
It's gotten a lot of hype though. Like, just to mention, Robbie Cole topped at the YCS Indy, and he's been testing a lot of Evil Swarm from playing against OCG players. So I think that's probably, you know, other than Elemental Dragons, people are looking at that to be one of the next big decks, which it's set to be.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're probably looking at what's going to be good, you know. Like I said, Shadow Imprisoning, Consecrated Light, 2 of them work together against this deck because they both shut down darks, which is what Evil Swarms are dependent on. They're dependent on their abilities, their swarming abilities.
They're just options that help you try to prevent Ophion from messing with your game.
Usually, yeah, if they can get Ophion out on you, it's hard to turn the tide of the game back in your favor. Keo, you had one too.
Yeah, I have a Rivalry Warlord, and I usually run it in 6M, and of course, it's worked very well against Evil Swarm, since they're not concentrated on one single type. They have like all over the place with Fiend, Dragon, Warrior, Spellcaster, and if you run with a Dino Rabbit, that's Beast, and Dinosaur. So yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the most dynamic things about Evil Swarm versus the last couple we went over with Harpies and Elemental Dragons. Harpies are dependent on winged beasts, and Harpy's pet dragon, running dragons for Channeler. And Elemental Dragons are strictly dependent on dragons. Your prophecies are dependent on spellcasters. Evil Swarms have went away from being type-dependent decks. So one thing I do like about Evil Swarm is that it's not type-dependent. But then again...
Yeah, it's got away from the archetype-driven stuff. But by name, they're all still... But it gives them, like, a built-in defense against cards,
But Rivalry of Warlords and Shadow Imprisoning Mirror Consecrated Light, the trio of that is pretty devastating to the deck within itself. So if you're looking at your local scene and you see Evil Swarm starting to become big, it's probably 3 really good go-to cards to place in your side deck. Consecrated Light 2 is cheap. Rivalry is cheap. And Shadow Imprisoning is somewhat cheap, but after Evil Swarm hits, they're probably going to shoot up. Because people are starting to look at the options to side against. Because
I guess there's also, like, 2 more, like, generic, because I'm just looking at the deck, and I'm, again, I compare a lot of what it does kind of the same way I view Dino Rabbit. So, like, just generic stuff to go along with cards you may already have that you could put in against this matchup would be something like Snowman Eater or Thunder King Ryo. Would they be the best options? Actually, they could be. They could be pretty good, but you probably wouldn't stake your game on them. But if you have them, if you have access to them already, they would be good, because Thunder King Ryo is going to stop any of the tutoring. It's going to make them have to respond to him before they make their Ixies play. Granted, they do have Heliotrope, which is an easy out to Thunder King Ryo. It's still only a 3 of in their deck. So, I mean, it's decent. They're decent cards to discuss, I imagine.
And, I mean, the final discussion point, kind of going over Evil Swarms, is variants. The other guys really didn't have variants because they're more based in the Evil Swarm itself. For myself, I've been testing something with Heliotrope and a Dark Gaia build. It's been testing somewhat successful. I mean, Dark Gaia, he has his weaknesses, but he's also a great monster. Him and an Archfiend Soldier make an easy 3,850 beater that can switch your opponent's defense monsters to attack and take it to 0. But, and it kind of runs along just like we were talking about. It runs still a rabbit build, but it gives you Dark Gaia as another option. Plus, it lets you look at some of your higher ranked Xyz monsters to run in the deck. Decent, but most of what comes out of it is Heliotrope and Bahamut. Just because I throw my level 7s in there for Big Eye, because I like to take my opponent's cards. And so
Big Eye and Bahamut.
So, yeah, I like to have Bahamut in there as well, so I can steal my opponent's cards. But, I mean, Evil Swarm looks to be kind of like it's going to be an autopilot deck. Fairly easy to run. So, I mean, there's not an exorbitant amount of information to go over than to give you some idea of how the deck runs. Some good side deck options. Definitely, if you're not familiar with Dark Gaia, take a look at him. See how he actually runs into this deck with Heliotrope and running some vanilla Fiend monsters. just a few things to cover before we end the night. We do have some spots open on staff. If you're interested, go to the staff application template. Read through there and submit your application to myself. Genzo's taking the lead on our race to 8,000. If you're hoping to win an Exodia mat, start to get recruiting because he's getting a commanding lead going. So, bring your friends.
Woohoo!
We have a great community. Make sure you're checking out our card of the week, worst card of the week, and Forbidden Reviews. Forbidden Reviews may be on hold because I think this last one just finished off every Forbidden card until we get our next format. Deck of the month, we kind of scrapped that. We had like 3 submissions. So we'll see how that goes later on down the road. Grand Prix finally ended. Our winners were Amy Lee and Beaver Commander. They won the Prophecy Destroyer tins. The winners of the raffle were Eddie Phoenix. He won the mat. Gunny Bear won the Calcujotter. But we do have a new Flash tournament up. It's for an Insector Ladybug mat. It's just starting. So if you want your chance to get in there and take Keo out, this is your time because the new tournament is starting. Make sure you're checking out Tuesdays too. We have the Midnight TCG Weekly Championship Series that Genzo runs. Definitely go down and take a look in gaming. Felicity Ryan's putting up some good information in there. KDP's been putting up some good information in the entertainment section. And if you're a Mafia player, check out the Mafia section. Right now we have everything filled, but we will have more games to come. And we want to throw this out way early. Just keep watching. Duel for a Cure will come around again, probably August or September. We'll start talking about it. We'll have another fundraiser drive to help fund against cancer, to help the Relay for Life. So we don't have Eddie to dance us out, so I guess to end out the Midnight TCG Competitive Edge podcast, I'll go dee 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 done.